Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's thewfia.org, and become a member today.
Welcome, everybody, to the PWZ podcast. I have a very special guest today. Very special. I've been looking forward to this one for the last couple of weeks. And Dave Dynasty, host of the Wrestling Nostalgia podcast, amongst many other podcasts that I've discovered while doing research for this.
Yeah. I stay busy.
Yeah, I've noticed. It's quite interesting. So normally when I bring someone on for the first time, I usually discuss the history of them discovering the world of professional wrestling. Obviously, where are you located again?
Well, I live in North Carolina now, but I was born and raised in Indiana.
Okay, so that explains why you're into. You discuss a lot of the WWA from of years past. We'll say,
yeah, correct. Yeah, I'm a big WWA fan, Dick the Bruiser fan. It was when I started discovered wrestling. It was still on the air. Now it was the waning years, but it was still pretty cool to discover at that time. But yeah. In Indiana, Bruiser, everybody knows Bruiser. Everybody has a Bruiser story. So Dick the Bruiser's, he's as much a folk tale as anything else there. Everybody talks about. So
I always find everything I learn about this. See, I did not get WWA TV out here. I don't know how localized was it. Was it just all local?
Yeah, it was all
that area. Yeah,
it was local. Indiana, up into Michigan, Ohio. I mean, maybe down in Louisville. I've heard Jim Cornette talk about how he got Bruiser stuff there in Louisville. It may be over, probably over, in Illinois some. But yeah,
right.
it was just in the Midwest.
Right. So they didn't expand as much as, like, say, the AWA did, or
no, they didn't expand at all.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think if you're talking about the waning years, now I remember they were still in existence in 1989 and 1990, correct?
Yep. That's about when they stopped.
Yeah. So I watched. I was still watching AWA at the time. I think I watched AWA up until they closed. And I believe that there was Mike George was still there, and he was going back and forth. Correct? Did they kind of have a working relationship, if I remember correctly?
Yep.
To an extent. Yeah.
Bruiser, Vern they were close. They were partners in Chicago,
right?
Bruiser, Vern, and Wilbur Snyder. So they went way back, all the way back in in the 50s and the DeMont era and all that stuff. They'd known each other forever.
Right.
But Bruiser would work with people if he could get something out of it. But
right.
Yeah.
So how did you discover? I mean, wrestling as a whole. Let's start there.
Honestly, it was through my grandmother. My grandmother lived close to us, just a few minutes away, and she was always a huge wrestling fan. She watched it, on the weekends. Where we lived, we were in central Indiana, so we like I said, we got the Bruiser stuff that was still on. Then of course, we got WWF stuff, in the NWA stuff, but then we were close enough that we could get the Louisville feed of Memphis, also.
Right.
And she watched everything. And so when I was there, and I spent a lot of weekends there because my parents, worked odd shifts and things and spent time there. So I'd watch it with her, and I was hooked when I started watching with her. And she was she was your prototypical, front row grandmother. She cheered the baby faces and hated the heels and she got really fired up about things.
Yeah.
And then when I was really young, she took me to my first show. It was a Bruiser show there, and she lived in Edinburgh, Indiana. It's a little small town, and they came every so often, maybe once a year, but maybe not even that. I don't know. To the high school gym there. And so she took me to my first show there. Yeah, I mean, it was just a few blocks, so we walked there. And I don't remember a lot of specifics, but I do remember, seeing it there, my first ring in person and seeing certain things and the vibe of it, and that just sunk the hooks even deeper into me.
Yeah. What stuck out to you as far as that kind of hooked you as far as like personalities and such, and who was your favorite at that time period?
Well, I mean, obviously, I loved Bruiser right from that.
Yep. Yep.
But I always, as a kid, and maybe even today so much, I've always leaned towards the heels, and
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
and I always liked the guys that could talk, right? I even at that age, I mean, I obviously love the matches and the in-ring stuff, but the guys that could talk, I was just amazed by them. I was always have been a huge Jim Cornette fan, always a Paulie Dangerously fan. But then it's like when I watched it was from the early 80s is when I started watching. But then when I really got, in the mid 80s, when I really got sunk in, I leaned towards the NWA stuff, right? Because I thought it felt, a little more realism.
Yeah.
And not that I didn't watch WWE but there was just parts I liked there, right? NWA I was always that guy when, my dad or someone give me a hard time. Oh, that stuff's fake. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe that, but not, hey, watch this, right? This is not fake. You can't tell me this is fake. And, and I just, I got sunk into I love the Flair Steamboat trilogy in like 88, 89, and stuff like that. I was, I was a Horseman guy. I love the Horseman. I was actually, my prime Horseman was when Wyndham turned and joined them. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
But it's stuff like I always like I hated Hulk Hogan, hated the Ultimate Warrior. Anybody like that. I always like the Hills for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah. When I was younger, I as well, it's the WWF was too cartoony, so I said no. The NWA, AWA, World Class, that's all real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everybody had realistic sounding names. It was more gritty. I love the feel of like say watching the Crockett and stuff. That it was in a darkened arena. It didn't look they didn't always focus on. There was not as many lights. They didn't focus on the crowd so much because WWF, I think their thing is, and they still do this today, is like they always did the back shot from the arena to show how full the arena actually was. And it always annoyed the hell out of me. It just was like, I don't care how many people are there. It's what's in the ring that is entertaining to me. That's why I'm watching this.
Yeah, I mean, the same. It didn't hook me. I guess part of it was maybe my age, right? I was a little too old where it did feel kind of fake and cartoony, to me. Like I said, I still watched it religiously because I consumed anything, right? And I remember, we were pretty young, and my dad got a satellite dish, and this is one of those big, 10-foot things that was in the backyard that would move and everything else. And we had some, the box with the card that we got everything, right? Pretty much all these channels. So I was able to get, Madison Square Garden Network and the Spectrum Network and see those, like the house show stuff, they were airing.
Yep.
But then I also would see Lucha Libre, right? We'd come across, whatever it was, whatever channel it was, watch Lucha Libre and stuff. And that was wild. So I was consuming everything, whether I really liked it or not. If it was wrestling, I was watching it. But the stuff that, I was taping a lot of stuff because I had, VCR, but the stuff, that I was mostly taping and rewatching and everything else, it was the NWA stuff. The Saturday Night Show, it was just, I don't know. It was just, like you said, it felt real, had a little bit of grittiness to it. And it was that thing where I could hold up to anybody that would snicker at you for liking wrestling. You'd be like, oh, I don't, it's not that cartoon stuff. Watch this. This is a sport here, And so it felt like, I don't know. It is one of those things where you didn't feel any shame. I mean, if
yes,
it felt a little more like you could hold it up and be a little prouder, I guess, to watch it.
It was a great era for wrestling. It's like I discovered in 1984, and I think I went to my first live show in '88. I went to a WWF TV taping here in New Haven, Connecticut. But I always bought the magazines. Was every week, and that was just I remember buying them with Greg the Hammer Valentine on the cover. And this is where I discovered all the wrestling that wasn't necessarily on TV in my era or area. Excuse me. And it was just. I still have boxes of magazines behind me. And it's just, I go through them every so often and I just find some amazing stuff. You know what I mean? That you probably skipped over 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Me too. I consumed the magazine. I have so many weird memories of reading these magazines. It was just odd stuff. Like for whatever reason, there was this. I always remember. I'm assuming it was PWI. There was this article about Luger and Wyndham when they were teaming up, and this was right before Wyndham turned. And for some reason, I remember this weird article where it's like this reporter was supposedly traveled with them a little bit and is talking about them being at a diner eating steak and eggs. It was I don't know why that sticks with me, but it's like at that time, I read those and I was like, it felt like, oh, I'm seeing something. I'm these are the guys behind, what they're doing. Obviously they were, made up kayfabe articles. They had no, very little truth.
Right.
But at that time, the magazines were, like you said, a whole different world, right? You were seeing things that you couldn't see on TV, sides of the wrestlers that you didn't see. And it was wild, when you look at them and you're like, oh, there's wrestling in Japan, there's wrestling in Puerto Rico, there's wrestling all over the country that I can't see. And it was just fascinating. Not that I ever really thought, I guess, that wrestling was just in my area, but there was no way to acquire the knowledge, right? To know that what was out there. And, and like you said, I consumed every magazine I could get. I bought them all. I had subscriptions to some of them, bought others off the newsstands. Cause I wanted everything I could get, anything I could, anything wrestling related, I wanted it.
Did you ever get into like tape trading and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I did. Cause, later I begged my grandmother, and for, I don't remember if it was my birthday or Christmas, where she gave me a subscription to the Observer. And, so I started, doing some tape trading. Like I said, I had some of that late Bruiser stuff. I was trading some of that. I was trading some of the Memphis, but I started, getting some stuff. And at that time, I was really trying to get a lot more Memphis, right? Because I really like the Memphis stuff. So I was trying to get quite a bit of that, because it always appealed to me. But I wasn't like real hardcore where I did it a ton, but I did some.
Yeah. I think there was probably a year where I went nuts with the tape trading.
Yeah.
Like every day there was packages showing up on and then after a while I just kind of weaned out of it and I would buy stuff. Like then the DVD era came in, it was too busy. I couldn't keep up with everything. Just much like today with as in adult life, I can't keep up with everything. I mean, there's so much product out there today as compared to back then, because back then you couldn't get everything in your area. Now there's the internet. God knows what else, so many streaming networks you can get to discover basically anything that you can get your hands on. So discover. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's wild. It's like you said, it's so oversaturated today, and I don't know if that's a bad thing or what. It's just and I don't know if it's maybe the online era where everything's so easily accessible. It's like back then it was like a scavenger hunt trying to find stuff, right? Going to flea markets, trying to find the guy that had a box of wrestling magazines. That he was selling, or like I said, on the satellite, thumbing through and finding a show that I didn't know existed and catching that or whatever it may be. There was like so many of these happy accidents, right, that you would come across. Yeah. And you really felt like you were having to work at it and keep, be diligent on this stuff and looking. And it's like, now it's so easily accessible. It kind of lost that side of it. And, or could just be the old man in me. I don't know.
I remember I did get Memphis up here for a brief period, and I cannot tell you, it was in the CWA era, and I can't tell you how that was one of those happy accidents, so to speak. It was just so exciting because I'm thinking, trying to remember exactly what it was. I remember just seeing like Todd Morton out there, and Cactus Jack and Gary Young, and who they were also associated in World Class at the time too. So I think it was like that. Was it the crossover area or period during for those guys? So it was. I got to tell you, I was so excited for that, and then after a couple of weeks, it was just poof, gone. And that's another thing about growing up in the '80s in cable TV. Sometimes in syndicated TV, sometimes you would get TV shows, and then it would just disappear after a little while, and then you had no idea what happened to it. So and then thumbing through the magazines, you'd be like, "Oh my goodness, this still exists."
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and it was like that with anything too. I mean, I have so many interests, so many varying things, and it's always like that, right? A cartoon you like would be on for a while and then just be gone, and you didn't know, and then whatever. It's just I mean, because you had no way of keeping up with that stuff to know, to gain the information. It was just it was what it was. So
and then that's of course I mean, sometimes in the '80s was it was a very huge sitcom era as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes things would come on, they'd last for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden they'd be gone. But that's the power of, like, say, Tubi TV or Pluto TV today. They'll have
Yep.
the entire things up there today. And it's kind of an amazing era right now, in a way, in itself, to
Yeah.
rediscover a lot of those lost gems.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it definitely is. Yeah. And I'm all the time doing that with things I follow or, watch it. And I guess it is still, there's some of that happy accident. It's just different now, right? If you scroll through, some kind of social media and you see a picture or a video clip of something that you've forgotten about, and it sends you down a rabbit hole on, on YouTube or Tubi or whatever it is. So it's just more of a, I guess those happy accidents now are more of a rediscovering than a discovering for the first time for me.
Yeah. So, when did you say you discovered the WWE again?
It would have been early 80s with my grandma. Yeah.
And it only had lasted, now we're not a business, it looks like 1989 according to my notes. So, and your podcast mainly deals with that, or the wrestling nostalgia with and that correct?
Yeah. It's
Well, sort of. Yeah.
Well, it's in the in the name. It's things I'm nostalgic for, and I interview pretty much anybody.
Right.
But a lot of times I do deep dives on WWA stuff. Right. I've interviewed a lot of guys from the WWA that nobody knows outside, right? Would know out of the Midwest. And these are guys that, it was that whole thing that when I decided to do a podcast, and I thought, what do I want to do? Right. Because I don't want to just go on there and just talk vague wrestling. I want, I want it to have, some purpose or some meaning for me.
Right.
And I thought, well, I really like this stuff, and I've always been a fan of this, and there's not a lot out there. So I kind of thought, well, I'm going to make it my mission then through this podcast to try to document some of this, right? Try to find some of these guys, listen to their stories, let them tell their stories, get some guys on that were, long time fans or whatnot, and discuss, show, whether it be a show or a wrestler, try to dive in a little deeper and tell some of these, because no one was doing it, and it doesn't. And I'm big on, I've always had the approach of my podcast to do that, to be more of a preservation, right? That there's guys, and it's so wild, because a lot of these guys, you approach them and they'll be like, I don't know who would know me, right? Who would remember me? Who would want to hear me? And I'm like, hey, trust me, there are, right? There are people that will remember you, and there's people that enjoy discovering something new and someone they didn't know. And I said, this is your chance to tell that, right? And to talk. And most of them, some of them are a little hesitant, right? Because I've had a lot of guys on for the, that first time podcast guys, and they don't understand the concept. And those are the guys I like doing, right? That I try to get guys, a lot of times I try to get guys that aren't on other shows, and that really probably wouldn't be approached by other shows. But I do dabble into other, other things, but it's mostly historical guys, older guys. Like I just had Steve Kern on, and it was just, because, hey, it's Steve Kern, man. It's fun to talk to him and hear him tell his stories, and he's done so much, and he just put a book out, and so it's not all Midwest, but yeah, it's very, very heavily leaning in the WWA and Midwest.
I think I've discovered a while back, and you've had some really great guests, and preserving the history of professional wrestling. There's not, there's very few that really try to do that. I like to think that I'm one of them, but I also have a lot of guys from my area on, as far as like New England indie guys as well, which I feel that's very important, trying to give them a platform. But also try to, I've been the first time for a lot of people as well. AJ Petruzzi, and I'm trying to think of who else. Jeez, there was a bunch of them. Phil Apollo, and Phil literally said he did not want to do any other podcast, but for some reason, I guess he liked me. However, there's been people hitting me up to try to get him for autograph signings and other stuff. I'm like, I could ask, but have you ever encountered anything like that before? Like your first or only like stuff like that?
Yeah. I've had several guys that for a while in the early 2000s, I did wrestle. I wrestled, I managed, and I've promoted shows. And so I've had a lot of guys that were very small local guys in the Midwest that I worked with. And I always, so there for quite a long time, we had this little, we would kind of have two interviews, right? We'd have a main guest, and then I kind of had a segment where it was a what happened to, kind of thing, where I would
Right.
find some of these guys that most people don't even, unless you're from my area, you don't
Right.
even know. And I'd get these guys on and talk to them, and they're all like, "Oh, that was fun. We'll come back and whatever else." And so most of those guys have never done anything before, probably never will do anything before, because most people don't know who they are. And
Right.
and when I lived in Indiana, I did a lot of the same thing. I had a lot of young guys on too,
Mhm.
because I was more plugged into the local scene, right? Going to shows,
Right.
working shows, whatever else, and I knew who those guys were. And I mean, I did. I had Brian Pillman Jr.'s first interview
Wow.
on our podcast. In my early episodes, I had Mance Warner on every week. He
Oh,
would do a thing
wow.
called Warner's Wisdom, where because I was helping book some shows, and we used Mance Warner, and he was just literally fresh out of training,
Wow.
and hadn't really developed into the Mance Warner that everybody knows now, the indie darling guy, and and he was a little almost timid, but I would talk to him in the back and whatever, and he was hilarious, right? He was such a great, and I'm like, dude, you're great, man. You got to talk more, and I'm like, just send me, talk to me every week on my podcast and just say whatever you want. Just babble. I don't care what there were some weird, he would go down rabbit holes. But it was just guys like that, a lot of young guys that most people didn't know it. Some of them are, have gone on to some, pretty decent things now. But yeah, so I think it's kind of the same approach with the preserving history of, I was, trying to get some of these young guys their first chance to get out there and kind of talk. And hopefully,
Right.
and I, I'm not saying I have a huge audience, but if a few people pick up on these guys and, do a Google search on them or whatever, I feel like, oh, so, if I can get them a fan or two, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had a lot of first time guys on over the years, and yeah, people reach out and they always think that you're like best friends with them because you dug up and found them. And, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not like, it's like, I'm not their agent.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like they'll be like, "Hey, can you try to get him for a signing?" I'm like, "I'll send him a message, and then
Yeah.
take it from there. I'll give him your information. If he doesn't reach out to you, then
Yep. Yep.
So, and it's funny. It's happened a couple times, but nobody, like you said, I'm not their agent, but it was fun talking to somebody like Phil or Vince, Apollo, whatever you want to refer to him as, depending on where he was with the. See, I grew up watching him in wrestle for the Savoldis and World Class, and then
Right.
obviously ended up doing jobs for WWF for a number of years. So
Yeah. I mean, I get tons of people that reach out all the time. They're like, well, how did you ever find that guy? Right.
Yeah.
Like, I thought he just disappeared. I'm like, I don't know. You just dig, right? You just dig.
Yes.
You try to find someone that knows him or is related to him and reach out and say, hey, can you ask this person, can I talk to him? Give them a problem, put the ball in their court. And I find, 9 times out of 10, they'll at least reach out and talk to me about it. I have had a few guys that have said, no, I don't want to. I'm completely washing my hands of the wrestling. I don't have any desire to talk about it. And I'm like, man, and it's always so disappointing when I hear that, because it's like, I'm like, it's like, I'm not, I wish you would come on and tell your story. And then you can, close the book on it by getting your information out there, but you can't convince them sometimes.
Yeah, that's all I want is an hour of your time, and that's I've reached out to a lot of people that just be like, no, you don't want to interview me, or I don't want to, I'll put other guys in your direction, guys they may be associated with, but it's like I've had a lot of fun, and I guess I've been lucky. Maybe it's the way you approach, maybe the way you send an email, but yeah, I think it's been fun trying to get the people's stories out there for a lot of these guys, and that to me is like the best part, I think.
Yeah. And once you get a few guys under your belt, and you secure a few, kind of quote unquote bigger names, or what, more known names, you get a lot of word of mouth that, when you reach out to other guys, and, you'll be like, oh yeah, I've heard of you. So-and-so said they talked to you and said you were pretty cool. And all right. Yeah. Cause some of these guys are so skeptical that if you're going to be fair, I don't know what they think you're going to do. But some of these guys like, oh, well, what's your approach to this? I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have it in game of this, just letting you talk. And, and I always ask them, hey, is there something part of your career that you would prefer not talk about, or any sensitive subjects? I'm whatever and some of these guys, you have this huge list of questions and all these things you want to talk about. And you get hung up on 2 or 3 of them because they tell so many great stories and get talking. And I'm like, hey, that's fine too. That's, if I don't care. Let's, if you want to talk about whatever, and then maybe we'll do a follow-up someday or, whatever. But a lot of times, like I said, when you get a couple under your belt, and that gives you a little good grace with some guys, because they're, they realize. I mean, I've had guys say, "Oh, well, who else have you interviewed? Anybody I know?" And I'll list off some names. And like, "Oh, well, yeah, those are some of my buddies. So you must be all right." So
I always have that list prepared, sitting there to copy and paste. This is who I've had been, on my show, and I've got like 20 or 30 guys, names they may know, So
yeah,
like, oh, okay, It's funny because that you mentioned that sometimes you only get stuck on like 2 or 3 questions, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing guys like Wendell Cooley, or Mike Williams, who was Mike Williams was Mike Von Erich's final opponent before his passing.
Yeah.
Because once I hit the record button and started talking, that I didn't even need to go. Like, those guys talked for 90 minutes, and I barely had to say anything. It's just they've had some incredible stories. You know, and then I just sat here and listened.
Yeah.
So.
I've had Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. on many times. He's a pretty good friend of mine. And we actually kind of did a show, me and him together for a bit. We're just talking about his career. But anyway, I've had him on many times, especially talking about other guys. And he called me a few weeks ago and was like, "Hey, Dave, I hear a lot of people talking about Dr. Jerry Graham, and they always key on the negative. Sometime can I come on and I want to give some of the positive side, right? Some of the, and I'm like, hey, of course, right? So I had all this stuff prepared, right? I was like, I'm going to ask about this and this and steer him towards this. And he got on and, I said, "Hi, how you doing? We're going to talk about this." He's like, "Yeah." And then I didn't say another word, I don't think, the whole time. He just talked and told stories, which led to another story. And I think he had a list prepared too of stuff that he wanted to talk about. So I literally just kind of introed him in, and I don't know if I got 2 words in the rest of and we talked 40 minutes, I think. And I was like, okay, that's fine. It's your platform here. Do what you want. And kind of felt I felt like, maybe I should be contributing to this podcast that's going on mine. But okay, I guess, but it's fun. I love these guys get doing that, and they go down these rabbit holes and tell stories, because it triggers a lot of things, that sometimes that maybe they've forgotten, or that they, people haven't heard yet. So when they get when they get rambling or get going on these things, to me, it's more important to let them say what comes to mind than to stick to my list, because I want it's all about them and them remembering these days that they had, and I don't care that I sit there and I touch on every single title win they've had in their career and what they thought about it. That's if that's not important for them to talk about, then let them tell the stories how they want to.
I think when I'm doing research, my notes are way more strict or formatted until I hit that record button, because half the notes don't end up being used.
Yeah, me too.
You know what I mean? Unless the guy he's not necessarily good at talking and conversating on once I hit the record, which has happened before, because sometimes it's like, "How long you want to go?" I said, well, it's turned into, it used to be just about an hour at a time. It turned into maybe a half hour to an hour. You know what I mean? Because and I'm sitting in the back of my head saying, it all depends on how good you are at answering questions, because I've had people come on here and just give like 1-word answers or 1-sentence answers. That conversation sucks.
Yeah, I've had that too. Some of those are some of the stuff. I've had some guests on that I thought, man, they'll be great. I really thought, I'm gonna get some good stuff. No one's heard before. This guy hadn't done. Yeah, and that's the way it's like. All right, so tell me about your time in this. What'd you think of it? It was fine. It's like, come on, give me a little more. And it's like, so I you prod, and it's like, okay, I'll just whatever, get what I can get here, I guess. And and so be it.
And sometimes you still, there's our episode. I have probably like 4 or 5 episodes I've never released, just basically because I sat there like, damn, you know what I mean? But, and then, I guess they're kept for the vaults for a reason. They're uploaded into my Google Drive or whatever.
Yeah.
So, so tell me, I did not know this. So tell me a little bit about your wrestling career.
Well, career is that's a strong word. It was in the early late 90s, early 2000s, right around that time. And it was a local group there in Indiana that I started going to as a fan. And I would go, and I got talking to the guy that owned it, and just about different things, and got to know him. And then what it started is I would talk to him and be like, "Hey, I could make your flyers for you, right? And I could really make them look a little
Right.
better. And he's like, okay, cool, do it. And so I started making the flyers. He really liked them, right? They were different than what he was doing. So I was like, hey, you need a little program, right? And I've done some writing because I used to do some stringer work for a local newspaper covering sports. And I said, I'll write little kayfabe articles and plug some of the big upcoming matches, and I'll come up with the little rankings and just different stuff. And I'm like, you can throw them out there and whatever, charge $1, make a few bucks. And I said, all you got to do is just pay for the copy. And he's like, okay, do that. So I did that, and by doing this, then I started coming and help setting up the ring and doing this stuff. And then over time, I was just around so much, I got to know these guys that eventually they're like, hey, get in the ring, right? Get in the ring with me. And they were showing me, how to bump, how to do this, how to do that. And so next thing you know, I mean, I'm, they're before each show, they're spending time with me, kind of training me. Right. And then it got to the point where he's like, well, would you like to do something out there? And I'm like, okay, well, what, and he's like, how about be a manager? I said, that'd be great. I'd love that. Right. And I thought, hey, I can talk, right? And I can, I know how to take a bump so much. I've got enough that I can make that work.
Right.
So I pretty much ripped off Cornette, right? The rich little guy with, that came out there and was all Weasley and everything else, and started managing. And then it got, as things go on and stories are told, the manager gets forced into a battle royal, or the manager gets forced into a match. And then people start saying, oh, hey, this Dave guy's not bad at selling, right? He's not bad at taking a bump. He looks pretty good. So he's like, hey, I want to transition you over and just make you let you wrestle. And I was a little hesitant, right? I'm like, I don't know. I've not had a whole lot of training. I don't know. I mean, I was not, I was all right, but it's like, I'm not this super athletic guy. I wasn't like built or anything, but I started doing it, and I loved it. It was such a rush. And, and there was it was so much fun. So many great stories of, guys working with whatever else. And I did that for a while, and, a few years. And then one weekend we had like, I don't know, 2 or 3 shows in one weekend at different places. And I took 2 or 3 really bad bumps on the back of my head. And the last one I took on the last show of the weekend, I have probably about 45 seconds to a minute that I don't remember, where I was blacked out.
Wow.
I remember being in the ring, and the next thing I know, I'm back in the dressing room area, and I don't remember anything. And then I started having trouble with my neck, and so I went to a doctor, had the MRI on this, that, and I had some problems with my neck, and they said, hey, you got to quit doing this, right? Or can we get a lot worse? So I quit. And so that's what, and then years later I had surgery on my neck, and everything else. But so yeah, it was just a few years. It was a lot of fun. It was just there in the Midwest, mostly in Indiana, mostly for this one group. I did go up and do a few shows out and about, did some shows in Chicago. It was a whole different world then, because to get booked places, you had to send out a VCR tape and a picture and stuff, because you couldn't, send a YouTube link. So it was a little harder. But it was a lot of fun. I got to work for you guys. I got to work Dutch Mantel and some guys like that. And so it was fun.
Yeah.
But then that kind of transitioned over to, I started promoting my own shows for a while and doing some things like that. It's like, once I got in and got the bug, I had to stay a lot, stay involved. And that's where it eventually led to the podcasting. It's like, what can I do now to kind of stay involved?
Yeah.
So that's where it went. But
there's been times that I've literally thought about, I do commentary now for a couple different local groups here. And there's been times I was like, oh, man, this just isn't working out. It's like, I work too much, and then I come here on the weekends, and then I'm just like, like you said, you just, and then all of a sudden it's like, you got the bug, wrestling is not one of the, it's like, I don't know, man. It's just like you love it too much sometimes. Professional wrestling is very, very special.
It is.
Place,
I mean,
at times.
Yeah. And at that time I was in my early to mid 20s. So it's like, I had all the energy. It was nothing then. I was like, I was wanting to do more and more and more, but but I in retrospect, the most fun I had was the managing stuff. Cause it's just, man, it's so cool. And I worked with so many great guys, and you got, it's like being ringside to watch some of this stuff. It's just great. And, and I did all the stupid little gimmicky manager matches, at a local, lost to a local DJ in an arm wrestling contest one time, and they put me in a diaper and all those kind of things, and, but it was fun because I don't know, it was my 15 minutes, I guess, back then. And I've milked it now for whatever 20 years or whatever in one way or another.
We have a pretty damn good podcast. I mean, and people know about it. I mean, you're keeping history alive, and I think that I was on Bob Smith's podcast not so long ago, probably in the last couple months. I know that he was on yours, and I think vice versa, if I remember correctly. But he's mentioned you as being one of those guys that just is keeping history alive, and that he really, really likes because of that.
Yeah, Bob blew my mind because I think he first reached out. I want to say it was on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, but I can't remember. One of the platforms he reached out to me. And literally just said, hey, I just want to thank you for the stuff you put on YouTube. Because he's like, I'd never heard of Bruiser Bedlam Wrestling, that era of WWA. He said, I'd never seen any of this. And he's like, I watched this. And I'm like, he's like, I'm such a fan of this show and these guys that I'd never seen before. And I'm like, dude, you're Bob Smith. You're the guy from the magazines. And I'm like, here you are. And I'm like that little kid in me that bought all those magazines all that time. I was like, what is this? And then he's like, when he started his podcast, he said that, I want to have you on. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding. I'm like, that's but man, Bob's a fun guy. He's a great guy. I agree so much with his point of view on things that he said. I'm so in agreement with him.
Yeah. The only time he's been on this show, we literally, the recording was about 2 hours, but I think we probably roughly talked a little bit over 3 hours between the pre-recording and after the recording. And he's one of the greatest guys that I've met doing this the entire time. And his show has become, between him and Brian Solomon, like those two guys, those are my two favorite shows that I look forward to each and every week in podcasting, literally.
Yeah. And then I found out, Bob at one point was a blues singer, and I'm a huge blues music fan. I'm like, oh, that is wild. But
when he told me that, I was like shocked. And then he had with the Bobby Blue Bland's
crazy
on his most recently. I worked in a record store for almost 30 years. And he had Rod Bland on, and I was just and that's how I discovered the blues eventually. It's just like started out as a young punk rocker kid working in a record store, but expanded my taste over that 30-year period. So
and Brian, like you mentioned, Brian Solomon, he's another great guy, right? I mean, he's done so much, whatever else, and man, his writing is great. I mean, his book on the Sheik was just you can't get much better than that. And
I have it.
And that was the same thing when he started his podcast. He asked me to come on and stuff, and I was like, man, it's like I don't know, it's weird. It's because I'm just this dude from Indiana, and it's like these guys that I'm fans of and enjoy their stuff when they want to talk to me, and it's like it's, I don't want to say intimidating, but it's almost like you're a little whatever, you're a little awestruck that he was like that I get it's, I tell my wife that all the time when I interview certain people, whatever else. I'm like, if you had told 12-year-old me that I'd be talking to so and so now, they'd been blown away.
That's definitely how I feel in a way. I'm just like, I get too excited that some people would just be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do that. And it's just that once I get into that conversation, I'm kind of like, I get a little nervous. I don't know how nervous you get. I get a little nervous going into podcasting each and every time. And now this is going on almost 4 years. It'll be this coming January, it'll be my 4th year. And the nerves really don't go away unless it's like, somebody that I've known and spoken to so many times, but it's pretty intimidating, but I love it still.
Yeah. I mean, I've done it with everything I've ever done. I don't think I've ever, even when I'm comfortable and confident in what I'm doing, it's that, it's that kind of nerve where it's like the anticipation, the excitement, right? And you're like, you're so, it's like you build something in your mind, how you want this to go, and you hope it's going to come through. I mean, still do that, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that stems out of the passion and the love of it. And, so I think if you lose that nervousness, to me, it's a sign that maybe the love's going a little bit and it's not as exciting anymore.
I got you. Yeah. So you recently became one of the board members on the WFIA, and you've had Brad Drake, who is a great guy.
Yeah.
On your program, and I actually just recorded with him, and it's coming out soon on the audio platforms. I believe I already released the YouTube link, but so I think that he's doing wonderful things, trying to come back with the WFIA.
Yeah, me too. And again, that's another thing. I was a member of the WFIA in the early 80s, right there on some of those waning times, and I didn't do anything with it. Right, it was just in the magazines. My grandma sent in. I got the certificate or whatever. I don't remember anything of it. But and I always, of course, knew of it. And you hear all these stories that these guys tell, and lots of guys that I've interviewed, talk about these days, these conventions and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, when I come across it on Facebook, I thought, oh, this, it's pretty cool. And at first, when I saw it, I thought, oh, this is just kind of a memories type thing, right? A memories group. And then when I really got looking at it, like, oh no, they're legit, bringing this back, and it was pretty cool. So that's and I signed up for everything and whatever else, and then I reached out to Brad and say, hey, I'd like you to come on, let's talk about this. Get this, get the word out on this a little bit. It's a very cool thing you're doing. Plus, it does have the nostalgia and the history in the past, so it fits in perfectly. And so one thing led to another, but it's a very cool thing. He's doing a great job, and I'm glad to see something like that out there. Right? It's fun, and I think it's a good tool for wrestling, and it's a good thing to be out there.
I think so. I proud contributor to the newsletter as well, which I love doing that. I love, I post the results from any of the shows out here, whether I attend or not. I usually am able to get them from somebody. Trying to expand my area here, and the print version, of course, is obviously we found out that it's going just digital. It's too expensive to print something like that in the modern era, which is a shame.
Yeah,
because I really liked opening that newsletter each and every one that came out, because it was always. I have a bunch of the old issues sitting here. I got them from Mr. Tom Burke over the years, and who I'm sure you're aware of. He's part of the board as well, or one of the special advisors.
Yeah.
And who, I'm telling you that I don't know if you've ever met Tom or visited Tom at all.
No, I've talked to Tom. Never met him or visited. I'd love to go to his place and be able to see his stuff.
Earlier this year I went. He lives about 45 minutes from me, so
yeah,
he invited me up a couple times. I finally went, and I was in awe when I walked in that room. I'll tell you that much.
I bet.
Yeah.
Tom's a great guy, and such a wealth of information, and that's great. He's awesome.
Yeah, it's he wants me to come back up. I'm looking forward to eventually going back up, because we're going to record to have him here as well, which I think that would be. I've heard him on several other podcasts, and eventually, hopefully, that'll happen soon. So,
yeah, it'd be very cool. I definitely want to get up. I have a handful of places like that I like to visit. Right, Tom's place. I reached out. Oh, it's probably been a year or so now to Dan Lambert, who did Impact, and I think he was in AWA for a little bit, but he does. I think he's an MMA trainer first and foremost. Anyway, he's one of the foremost wrestling and mixed martial arts belt collectors. He has got this huge collection of belts, and he owns the WWA title. He was the one that bought it. And but so I just reached out to him right through his MMA thing. And it's like, hey, I'm this huge WWA fan. I like to document WWA. I would love to come if I could sometime. He's in Florida. If I could come sometime and just see the belt, actually take some pictures for documentation purposes, whatnot. And he's like, oh yeah, come down, just let me know and we'll figure it. I'm like, so I want to get that set up, because I'm like, it gives me chills just thinking about seeing that belt and holding that belt. And that's not even taking into account I don't even know what all else he owns. He's got so many other belts. And so I'm excited, so I have things like that. And people I know that have collections that I want to get out there and I want to see these things and everything else.
Dan Lambert, the guy that was all right. I thought this was the same guy. The guy that was recently in AEW, I guess last year.
Yeah, he did some kind of managing thing with Scorpio Sky and somebody.
And
Ethan Page, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I don't really watch it that much, but
I don't either.
Is this the same guy? And it's not my cup of tea. I might watch tonight's show, the pay-per-view, but I have no idea. I usually get tired of it and shut it off relatively. I tried watching the Friday night show this past Friday, and it just was not something that I could get into. It's not my style, I guess. Not that a lot of modern wrestling is. I don't know how you feel about modern wrestling. Do you still watch it all today?
Not really. I watch bits and pieces here and there. Guys I like, and I just seek out the stuff online. I can't sit through the whole shows. They lose me.
Yeah, I watched. Sorry.
No,
I watched the WWE pay-per-view last night, and I tried watching the WWE show last night, and literally the 3.5 hours, I was just like, it was just absurd. It's not my thing. I guess there's an audience for it these days, but it's just I'm not that audience, I guess. So
me neither.
Yeah.
If I watch, I watch old stuff. That's my go-to.
Yeah, one of the other channels that I YouTube channels rather, I should say. I'm sure you've heard of it. There's the Armstrong Alley channel, which brings up the most obscure and weirdest professional wrestling that you could think of. And I love digging through that channel. I'll sit there for an hour before I decide what to watch, going through everything, because there's stuff I've never heard of before, some of the groups and stuff like that. So I have to give it to that guy. Wherever he's finding this footage, I have no clue.
Well, he orders from different places. Yeah, he's a good guy. I have his Google Drive or whatever, and there's so much stuff on that too. And but he's such a good guy, because he's one of those that when he gets stuff, if he comes across anything WWA, he automatically reaches out to me. And it's awesome. Like, and he's like, "Oh, hey, I got this," and he'll just like send it to me, and he'll be like, "Hey, you put that up on your thing, man, because I know you put that up there and stuff." So he's actually gotten me a couple of, not a ton, but a couple of WWE episodes that I didn't have before that he's come across. So I like, that's so cool when the guy knows what I'm into, and when he comes across it and he's kind enough to reach out. I like that. I don't know where he gets it. He gets some weird stuff, some obscure stuff that I mean, and it's so fun. All the little local access wrestling shows from the 80s and stuff, and on. It's just, it's crazy.
He's getting those tapes from somewhere, and it's pretty awesome. That's all. I mean, I'll sit there and watch almost anything on that network too, on his channel. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So I mean, we had some of that here in Indiana, some of that local access stuff, and it's fun to watch sometimes.
Yeah, I try looking for the stuff that aired in like the earlier 2000s on Connecticut local access channels, and it's a shame I can't find any of it anywhere. And I used to have so many of those tapes.
Yeah,
back in the day, in the earlier 2000s, and I recorded almost everything. And I wish I still had it. They're just hard to come by. I don't know who has them anymore. Let's see. So you obviously out in that area, WWE historian, if you will. You guys, obviously, people like David McLean got his start there before he went into women's wrestling. Were you familiar with him back then?
Yep. Yeah. He was the broadcaster through the 80s there. He was the guy, introducing the matches, talking, do the commentary and everything else. Yeah. He started as a photographer. It was a fan, then a photographer, and then started doing that. There's several guys that, like Scott Romer was a photographer, and he ended up marrying Dick the Bruiser's daughter, and then ended up doing, Saul Creechman did a manager thing on air through the 80s and stuff. So, but I was familiar with Dave McLean because he was every week was the guy that hosted the show and did the commentary.
Yeah. Are you familiar with, now this guy has been on my show 2 times, and has become a pretty decent friend, but are you familiar with the Sinister Minister of Fear from that area? He worked in the WWA for a brief period.
Oh, yeah. He, on the late, he was in that late stuff. Yeah, I have a bunch of his videos, and that where he did, and he recorded some of Bruiser's last promos and different things, and on their show, because they would take a lot of the Bob Loose things and different, some of that late stuff and repurpose it, and do these interviews. Yeah, I'm familiar with him, and I've talked to him online.
Yeah, he just sent me a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I know he's up.
Yeah, he just sent me a bunch of pictures and stuff.
I know some of his stuff. So, no, it's okay. Some of his stuff's on one of the streaming networks now, I think. But somewhere over the years, I've got a bunch of his videos that he put out back in the day, the VHS of that stuff.
Yeah, he put out the Chicago Challenge, just the promotion he owned, and then the Bob Loose tapes, obviously, and the Hall of Fame Classics. But a lot of all that stuff that he owned the rights to is all coming up on the Savoldi network that's coming up. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. But
I'm
familiar with him.
So this show is also going to be on the Savoldi network coming up very soon in the coming months. So I'm pretty excited about that. I haven't really mentioned that to anybody because they haven't announced it yet.
Congrats. That's a cool thing.
Yeah. I've become pretty friendly with them. They've helped me with guests, and just share. I think that they like the positivity that I provide for them. I was a huge fan of the Savoldis back in the late 80s into the 90s, up until they closed, probably I think in 95-ish, the original version. So that's pretty much that. So hopefully that'll be soon. I'm not exactly sure when. They haven't told me when. But so what else are you into before we jump on out?
Well, let's see. My other big passion is horror movies. I do have a horror movie podcast. That's one of my other
Yep.
podcasts. And then, like you said, I got the wrestling nostalgia, and then I also do I do an ECW podcast because I was a huge fan of ECW back in the day. So, but that's pretty much it. I'm coming into my time of year here. This is what we call in this household Spooktober. From here on through the end of the year, I'm a big Halloween Christmas guy, and like I said, I love horror movies. I watch horror movies almost nonstop, virtually nonstop, all the time.
I would, but my wife is not a fan, so I have to watch them when she's not around.
Yeah, well, my wife is, and so yeah, we watch a lot. But yeah, like I said, I have a podcast where we talk horror movies, we review horror movies, new horror movies, typically new, and like I said, just because it's my other passion, I like talking, so I thought, well, I'll do one with that. But
what's your favorite movie? Your favorite horror movie that?
Well, my favorite horror movie will probably always be the '78 Halloween, because I just think it's so perfect, right? It's just so suspenseful. The music's great, the character's great.
Yep.
I have guilty pleasure horror movies that I won't ever say are great movies. But I love like Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I love Sleepaway Camp. I love Reanimator. Those are some of my favorites. I won't say that any of those
movies.
Yeah, I won't ever say that any of them are what I would put up as spectacularly made movies, but they are definitely comfort movies for me that I watch all the time.
What's your favorite era for horror movies? I'd have to say mine is the 1980s. You can't get any better.
Yeah, mine too. I mean, I grew up during that time. Going to movies and seeing them, going to video stores, and it was so great just to go to the horror section, just grab something based on the cover alone, not even knowing what it was. And I'm a slasher guy. I love slasher movies.
Same.
And so I would say the 80s.
Yeah. I think it kind of died down into the mid to later 90s. That's where I'm not into all this like crazy special effects, like slasher things is where it gets me.
Yeah. I'm a practical effects guy. I like when do it practical effects. I enjoyed the Scream movies up through the 90s, most of them, the franchise, and there are some movies now that I really like and whatever else, but they don't. Even if I enjoy it, they don't hit me the same way as some of those old movies. They don't feel the same a lot of times. I mean, there are exceptions, but it's like with anything else. Even if I enjoy something, though, it's like I still have the nostalgia for the stuff when I was young.
Yeah, and one of the other things is I think that a lot of modern horror is kind of disappointing in a way. But however, if you sit there and read like magazines or whatnot, you can find some really good stuff that's like not necessarily mainstream, if you will.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A lot of like you go through the movie. That's what I was doing for a while when I was just like, man, modern horror is trash. And it was just like I was buying horror magazines like left and right. Just up until a couple of years ago. A lot of the direct to video stuff was way better than the major stuff that's coming out in the theaters and all that other stuff that they're hyping up so much.
Yep, definitely. That's there's a lot of lesser. I mean, we get because of our podcast, we get sent a lot of screener links for independent films and different things. Yeah. And man, I watch some of them and I'm like, man, I enjoy those more than the big, but some of them more than the big studios because there's just, there's a passion to them. Right. And they're still doing the practical effects and because of their budgets, they're still having to pretty much do them like a movie from the 80s or, an old school movie. That's how they have to do them. And I enjoy a lot of those movies.
So you mentioned the 78 Halloween, which I'd have to say is really up there on my list as well, because that's one of my favorite series. What did you think of the last film that just was recently released?
I didn't like it.
Me neither.
I did not like it. It's a point of contention between me and my wife because she did like it.
Okay.
But I was very disappointed. I thought, I don't know. It felt like two movies trying to cram together. And it didn't. I don't know. There wasn't enough Michael in there for me for being the last, and I don't know. It was just. It didn't feel like the right cap. If it's supposedly supposed to be the last, which I don't believe that, but if it's supposed to be the cap to the story, it is. Yeah, it was very disappointing to me.
See, I think the one that came out the previous year was actually pretty decent. It wasn't the worst movie on earth. It kept my interest, but this one I had a hard time sitting through. Me and a coworker were both in agreement with you that I don't really think it's the last one. This one seemed to have a little bit of, I wouldn't say supernatural, but sort of in a way, and I thought the soundtrack was way better. They had groups like the Cramps and Dead Kennedys in there, two groups I love. And then I just thought otherwise, it was just the killing at the end was just completely horrific.
It was weird.
So,
yeah.
It was very weird. It was just a strange film.
Yeah, I felt the same way about the latest Scream movie too. It was all right for a while, and it started pretty good, and then it hit a point. And I was like, it kind of went downhill for me, and I just didn't feel like the writing was really great. And I've attributed a lot of it, I think, with that one. Not to get on too much of a tangent here, but I feel like when they originally wrote it, they thought Neve Campbell would be on board, and then when she pulled out, they tried to do some rewrites, and I think I don't know. I didn't. It was a letdown for me too, and I was so excited about the whole concept of them being in New York, and I thought something fresh, something different. I thought, oh, that'll be cool, but overall, it disappointed me too.
Yeah, it was pretty disappointing. But while I did think it was the best film out of that and the Halloween, and I didn't want to shut it off throughout the whole thing, but I thought that it just went in a different direction that I couldn't care for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. Dave, I want to thank you for speaking with me for the last hour. Why don't you tell everybody that where they can find you, where they can find your podcast and all that fun stuff.
Well, my podcasts they're on all the platforms. They're on YouTube and then all the typical podcast platforms. Like I said, the one's Wrestling Nostalgia. The one is called This Is Extreme. And then the horror movie, if anybody's interested in that, is called Listen to Their Screams. So if you search those, they're on all the platforms. The easiest place to find, I'm on Facebook if you look up Dave Dynasty. And all the podcasts have pages if you look them up there too. But probably the best place to find me is whatever on Twitter, X, again, whatever it's. I still call it Twitter. And I'm at the Dave Dynasty, and I'm probably more active on there than I am anywhere. And then if you look up all the podcasts have Twitter accounts too and stuff. So, but it's pretty easy to find if you search me on any of those platforms. I come up. I'm there.
Cool. I want to thank you. Like I said, speaking with me for the last hour, and look forward to having you back in the future.
Sure, anytime. Yeah, it was fun. I'm always open to talk wrestling.
Hi, this is Bob Smith. You might remember me from my years at Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. Well, now I've started a brand new podcast called The Outdated Wrestling Hour. Yes, we're going to take a whimsical look back at the wrestling figures, stars, and trends from years gone by. We're talking 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and a whole lot more. There's going to be laughs. There's going to be fun. There's going to be action. You name it. Please tune in for The Outdated